Saturday is a special day, a day that none of us should forget. Saturday is Veterans Day. And for those people that have served our country, they deserve a huge round of thanks from us. We'd like to recognize anybody in the audience that is a veteran. If you could stand for a second, just to get that acknowledgement today. Anybody that served in the military in the past. Thank you for your service. I as well served with the 101st Airborne Division, but I was blessed to have never been deployed to a combat zone during my tenure with the military. Obviously, many people are not so fortunate. Julie Hera DeStefano is an incredible woman. Someone I met about 3 years ago at Carnegie Mellon University during the course of an event that was there to honor members of our military, where all 5 of the corps, the Marine, Army, Navy, Air Force, and Coast Guard were there represented. And part of the evening was showing snippets from a documentary that Julie Hera has made. She is a native Pittsburgher, our own born and bred filmmaker, a graduate of Carnegie Mellon University. And she came up with this idea in spring of 2009 to look at people who have been deployed and look at the issues that they face being reintegrated into the world that you and I enjoy every day. And it's only through sheer imagination that any of us are able to fully understand, or even maybe a little bit understand, the problems, issues, and challenges that kind of an existence would create for the person that's been deployed. In particular, she's talked to mostly women. So she's done a great job of that. She started to make a documentary about the redeployment and the reintegration of these veterans. In the course of that assignment, she was noticed by people that were deployed already in the Middle East, and she was, as her resume shows in the front of your book, invited to spend some time in Afghanistan with people that were over there. In fact, she spent 3.5 months over in Afghanistan with units in combat zones. She came back home, interviewed those people that were coming back home that she had met over there, as well as others, and put that together in an amalgamation of interviews and memories and impressions of people that have served our country in the direst of situations where your personal safety is a great risk, and you have at home those things that we all love that we want to return to. So what we're going to do is we're going to have Julie Hera come up. She's going to present a little bit about her documentary, show you a little bit about this documentary film, A Journey to Normal, and then she's going to take questions from the audience if you guys have it. I think what you'll find is that this film in particular creates what she was aiming at, to create a dialogue between those people that are returning home from these venues and in combat zones and dangerous places around the world, and where we're at day to day, and making sure that we better understand what we can do to help these people in the future. So with that, I'll let Julie Hera come up. I don't know where there she is. And please give her a warm welcome. We're very lucky and happy to have her. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Thank
You're welcome.
I'm always a little embarrassed by the introductions. Bob has been just a wonderful supporter of our work for a number of years now. So I'm so grateful for the opportunity to be here today and his invitation. One of the things I admire most about him is that even though he's no longer in the military, he still embodies that military work ethic and lives a life dedicated to serving others in his community. And I think that's a fabulous thing. And I know that the firm also has a long-standing commitment to honoring veterans, which is also something that we hope that you all who are not with the firm will take out into your personal and professional lives as well. And I want to thank you for joining this discussion today. I'm really excited to share our work with you, and I also look forward to taking your questions and hearing your ideas. When we get to the end, I have some questions for the audience as well, but I hope you'll have questions for me. I also want to introduce my producing partner, Andrew Swenson, who's here today. I'm very lucky that Andrew and I get to work together on a daily basis. He's a civilian like me, but he is every bit as passionate about this work as anyone could be, so I'm very grateful that he was able to join us today. I always like to start by asking, we identified that we do have a few veterans in the room. I have a profound gratitude for your commitment to service. One of the things Bob might not know is, the 101st took very good care of me overseas. I was there with 2 of their brigades, so I have a fondness for your units. But I also like to expand the question and ask, does anybody in the room have family members that have served in the military? Can we raise hands on family members? And then the third question is, do any of you work with or hope to work with veterans in your professional lives? Okay, so in those 3 questions, we just united most of the room. And that's kind of how Western Pennsylvania works, because we have a very large veteran population here. I don't have a military background, but I've had the unique opportunity to live and work with some of our women and men serving in Afghanistan, and my team has followed these women through their first 2 years of transition home. Now, I'll be the first to tell you that I will still never truly understand all that they've experienced overseas and back home, because I've been living it very differently than they have been living it. But their willingness to invite me into their daily lives has allowed me to begin to recognize the passion and the abundance of resiliency that each service member has within them, no matter what they've experienced. So I have a question for you. When I say the word veteran, what image pops into your head? What does a veteran look like? Shout out some answers for me. When you say the word veteran, you close your eyes, what is the first image that comes to mind? What do you see? Uniform. You see a uniform. What else do we see?
I see an older gentleman.
An older gentleman. What else do we see? Discipline. We see discipline. What else? What else comes to mind in that image when you say the word veteran to yourself? What are you seeing in your head?
Body injury.
I'm sorry? Body's injury, the injury to the body. So a lot of times we see that person in a wheelchair. A lot of times we see that person with the hat on. And it's usually the older gentleman with the hat that has the wartime service and the name of the ship or where they've served, right? So typically, we don't even realize how sort of ingrained our preconceived notions of veterans are. An interesting point. Nobody in the room said, I see the young mother, or I see the woman. What we learned throughout doing the project and putting the work together is that the women in Journey to Normal, when they close their eyes and say the word veteran, they see the exact same images that you're bringing up. Very few of them actually saw themselves and identified themselves as veterans in their own minds. The older man with the hat is typically who we think of when we think of veterans. Now, I think in an attempt to understand something, our society often attaches labels. And the military labels are often acronyms, right? Those labels are then repeated in the media. And often before we're even aware of it, those labels also shape our perceptions and create mental stereotypes. So what are some of the labels that the media comes up with when they talk about veterans in the media? What are some of our veteran labels? And let's start with, what are some of the positive labels that the media talks about? What are the words that we hear? We heard some of them earlier here. What else comes to mind? What are some of those positive labels that we attach to veterans in service? Heroes. They're heroes. What else? Dedication. Brave. Sacrifice. Anything else come to mind? Yes? Humble. And boy, is that true. You know, you can't get military people to take credit for any of the amazing things that they do every day. What they constantly tell you is, well, I was just doing my job. So we have these wonderfully positive images that we talk about. But I also want to talk about what are some of the labels that the media presents us with that focus more on the challenges. What are some of the more difficult labels that we hear? That again, that focus us on difficulty and challenge. What are some of those acronyms that we hear in the media? Post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD. We hear a lot about PTSD. What are some of the other things we hear about? Homeless. What are some of the other challenges? Suicide. Drug addiction, alcoholism, traumatic brain injury, military sexual trauma. And please, don't get me wrong, all of these issues are very, very real, and they deserve our collective attention. to try to help solve them and alleviate them in the veteran population. But these labels are not necessarily, these negative labels are not necessarily applicable across the entire veteran population. But I think that once society attaches a label, we kind of mentally check the box, and we accept that level of understanding as the end of our consideration. And we assume that if these labels are true for a segment of the veteran population, if they're true for one veteran, then they must be true for all veterans. This sometimes means that we only see veterans through the lens of their potential challenges. Now, in today's military, the burden of the many is borne by the few, because less than 0.5% wears the uniform today. It leaves civilians increasingly dissociated from veterans, their families, and an understanding of their service. Now, I use the term service because it's all-encompassing. It doesn't just mean deployment. The American public is dissociated from their entire military experience. From day one of basic training, service members begin an indoctrination into a unique culture. It includes the daily stress of being battle-ready at any moment, the uncertainty of whether or not they will deploy, and for members of the National Guard and Reserves, the complications of integrating their military and their civilian careers. And without a fundamental understanding and appreciation of their experiences, we civilians are ill-prepared to respond to veterans on any level. As Jill tells us in the film, even thank you for your service often becomes this awkward dance that we do with each other. We're so disconnected from them that we aren't even aware of how much we don't know. We decide that we should show our appreciation, yet thank you can sometimes come off as an obligatory remark that some thinks absolves us of the need to understand and appreciate their sacrifices. Now, the Journey to Normal project endeavors to bridge the military-civilian cultural gap in understanding and demystify the American veteran by revealing the human being behind the uniform. We believe this is a crucial first step toward genuine connection. So today, I'd like us to take a little journey together. I'm going to attempt to take you to the combat zone and home again, and share with you some of what we've witnessed and learned from these remarkable women and their families, with the goal of informing and empowering your professional and your personal interactions with veterans. As I mentioned earlier, our Commonwealth has the 4th largest veteran population of any state in the nation. So your connections to veterans are not just limited to your professional roles. Now, we're going to begin with a trailer for our feature-length documentary, Journey to Normal Women of War Come Home. It starts with a few seconds of the base siren. If you've served in the combat zone, you understand why I'm telling you that up front.
A female that's in the military to begin with has a unique inner strength.
I've changed.
And there's the happy homecoming that you see in the movies, but they don't show what happens afterwards.
Am I going to see my wife again? That's what I was thinking. Is this girl that I married, is she going to come home to me, or is it going to be somebody else?
For most civilians, the war is like a movie, and it isn't real to them. But it is real, and the soldiers are real.
Given the fact that we've been at war for the longest time in history, that will affect many, many families.
I'm coming back home. Yes, I'm coming to see how my children have grown, but I've changed.
You can't predict the secondary effects of the empowerment that comes with conquering something you never thought you could do.
You have been changed forever. I think in a good way. I feel honored to serve. It's one of the biggest things in my life. I'm Lieutenant Colonel Yvonne Daly, and I came home to Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania.
I came home to Middletown, New York.
Nottingham, Idaho.
Dayton, Ohio.
Ida Grove, Iowa. Fort Knox, Kentucky.
I'm home in Marion, Iowa.
I'm going home to Fort Drum, New York. Lafayette, Indiana. Hampshire, Oklahoma City, Wisconsin.
I'm Rebecca Thompson. I'm a colonel in the United States Army, and I'm going home to Charlotte, North Carolina.
I didn't set out to be a war reporter. And the truth is, I didn't even intend to be a filmmaker. And as recently as the summer of 2010, if you had asked me which of the world's 190 plus countries I envisioned I would visit in my lifetime, Afghanistan would have been at the bottom of that list. So how did I get here? It's early in 2009, and I'm sitting down to watch the Oprah show, looking for a little downtime at the end of the day. And a woman appears, a veteran of Iraq. And she tells a story about a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. After her return from Iraq, her daughter asked for a peanut butter and jelly sandwich, like she had so many times before. So the mom walked into the kitchen like she had so many times before, but this time things were different. This time she had to make that sandwich with only one arm because she had lost the other in Iraq. And the woman looked at Oprah and she said that in that moment of attempting to be a mom again, she realized how much her life had forever changed because of her service. And in that moment of watching her tell that story, I realized that my life had also forever changed. It dawns on me in that moment that in today's warfare, in today's military, we must have thousands of women who are serving in the theater of combat. How many incredible stories are there among them? And do women's deployment experiences differ from those of men? And one pivotal question formed in me, a question that would soon lead me on a 342-mile walk from Philadelphia to Pittsburgh, right along Route 30, on to some of the most austere regions of the combat zone in Afghanistan, and on to bases and hometowns across the US. One question has literally taken me tens of thousands of miles from Alaska to New York, Idaho to Texas. And that one question is this: what happens when they come home? Now, through a series of unlikely events, which I believe are divine interventions, I was contacted by a local Army colonel, Tom Stokes, who's from Glenshaw, PA. He learned about the project while home on leave in the middle of a year-long deployment to Afghanistan. And when we met, he told me that in order to successfully tell a story of transition, you must come and understand what people are coming home from. You must come to Afghanistan. Now, I believe that when someone asks you to bear witness, you must go and bear witness. Now, I was not working for, nor have I ever worked for, an official news agency. So with the help of Colonel Stokes and his chain of command, I spent 5 months cutting through red tape with ISAF, the Pentagon, heads of military public affairs. I incorporated my own company, secured all necessary insurances, received all recommended vaccinations, and having traveled through New York, London, and Dubai, finally, on December 22nd, 2010, I arrived alone on a sparsely populated Safi Airways flight, commercial flight, at the Kabul International Airport, with over 100 pounds of camera gear and body armor, carrying my sleeping bag, my camp pillow, and the few clothes that I would wear for the next few months, and made my way to the local NATO base to begin a solo embed that lasted just over 3.5 months. Now, the truth is, most people thought I was crazy for wanting to stay so long. But I saw it as an opportunity to understand and convey stories on a deeper level, which is an opportunity that the media does not often seize. Now, what's transpired over the next 3.5 months, still to this day standing in front of you, feels completely unreal to me. I traveled all around Regional Command East. I had 24 helicopter drops into some of the most austere regions of the combat zone, from Forward Operating Base Gardez to Combat Outpost Herrera, to Camp Clark, and many others in between. I convoyed on missions outside the wire, including the celebration of the 100th anniversary of International Women's Day, and I met with over 100 female veterans who shared their experiences with me. We talked about why they joined the military, what it was like to be deployed, who was at home waiting for them, and what they thought coming back would be like. We also talked about what they would most like their communities to know and families to know that maybe we miss or don't understand. They talked about what it's like to trek to the bathroom over the rocks in the middle of the night on a blackout fob, Forward Operating Base, and hope that there's enough warm water, or water at all, for your 3-minute shower. And how wonderful it is to receive a care package from home with some personal item that you asked for because your COP, or combat outpost, doesn't have anything resembling a PX or a store. They also talked about navigating the rules of engagement and the legal complexities of qualifying enemy combatants while in the heat of battle. They talked about the 9-line medical evacuations from the battlefield and caring for the wounded, including double and triple amputees, and carrying your personal tourniquet with you at all times because you are in the combat zone, which means even if you don't ever leave your base, you are never completely out of danger. And what it's like to Skype with your 2-year-old son who can't quite understand where you are and now thinks that you live in the computer. We talked about the simplicity of life there and the often monotonous repetition, which they frequently described like the movie Groundhog Day. While on base, you have some form of housing provided for you, and where you are and the size of your base will greatly influence your experience. You have a dining facility or a DFAC of some sort where meals are provided for you. You wear a uniform every day, and you have a highly specific military job that you perform every shift. And that shift will average anywhere from 12 to 24 hours straight, longer if you are out on mission. And no matter what happens, whether you are mortared by the insurgents, or it is 120 degrees, or it is Christmas Day, you get out of bed and you pursue your mission. You follow your routine and you do your job because all the pieces of the military puzzle have to come together in order for that mission to succeed. The landscape, including the vehicles, the buildings, and the uniforms are monochromatic and devoid of all the lush colors of home. And all the while you're on guard because the intel warns of pending attacks. The base sirens go off day and night when incoming is detected, and on the air bases, the sounds of F-15s and helicopters taking off in pairs are constant. And on the small outposts where blackouts are required at night and you're only permitted to use colored pen lights to guide you, there is a deafening silence, broken only by the sounds of boots on the rocks as you passed by each other anonymously in total darkness. And it is Groundhog Day again and again and again. But for as monotonous as it can be while you are living it, it is that very purpose-driven simplicity that veterans often miss. They frequently miss that same Groundhog Day sensation where they repeated the steps of their jobs day after day after day, because it is easier to repeat your mission-driven purpose than it is to walk into the grocery store and be confronted by this choice of 75 different kinds of cereal, like that scene in the Hurt Locker. Or handle the insensitive and ill-conceived questions that civilians often ask when we see them out in uniform. Questions like, hey, did you kill anybody over there? Veterans tell me that this happens frequently. You know, military men and women have often said this to my team, you know, it was easier over there. Over there, you know exactly what your mission is, and you're well trained to do your job. In the war zone, you're isolated from your loved ones back home, and your environment is devoid of the typical things you might do to unwind from your day, like see a movie in a theater, or have a glass of wine with friends, or sit and cheer at your child's baseball game. You develop a keen appreciation for all of the luxuries of home, things like a bathroom that's inside. And our servicemen and women do without on deployment. It often makes them realize that so much of what we worry about back here in this land of opulence and choice that we take for granted, it just resets their whole idea of what is really important and what should be appreciated. And sometimes when military veterans return home, they're a little less tolerant of our complaints. A combat veteran might not sympathize when a civilian wearing shorts complains about 90-degree heat, if that veteran has gone on a foot patrol when it was 120 degrees and they were wearing a long-sleeve uniform, boots, and 100 pounds of gear. And in the combat zone, you bond tightly together on a basic human level. Because even though you have joined and stayed in the military to protect and defend your country, when you are in the heat of conflict, you are only concerned with protecting the battle buddy on your left and your right and making it home together. Your reality in that moment is about each other. And in the most austere foreign environments, devoid of all the comforts of home, faced with the most difficult of missions, you feel as alive as you have ever felt. You live every moment fully, good or bad. And what was echoed to me time and time again in theater is that no matter how difficult the conditions, that given that same choice to join the military all over again, they absolutely would make that same choice, because that camaraderie and that sense of being part of something larger than yourself helps you to overlook the hardship. We have an all-volunteer force. There is no draft today. Military people serve by choice. These individuals raise their right hand and they make a profound commitment to serve, protect, and defend our nation and our Constitution. And they don't take it lightly. They are incredibly proud of their service. They do not equate their service with a political decision to go to war in the first place, and neither should we. When considering the veteran, forget the politics. This is one of the things they most want us to understand. Now, overseas, the women talked about being so excited to see their loved ones back home, but also anxious about how it would be because they'd been away for so long. They began repeating the mantras in the months leading up to their return. Things like, I have to remember that they've been living in the house for a year without me. They have a new way of doing things and it might not be how I did things. Or, when my 4-year-old son misbehaves, I have to remember to react like he's my 4-year-old son and not like he's one of my soldiers. Then one by one, they came home, and that journey to reconnect began. Now, we assume that homecomings are buoyant and happy and celebratory, and they are. But there's also an underlying tension there that the media doesn't often show us. And if you're at those homecomings, you see it written on their faces and on the faces of their family. They are wondering, is my daughter the same person who left? Will my wife and I be able to reconnect in our marriage? Will my young child recognize me after almost a year away? Now, my team has followed 8 of these women on that journey through their first 2 years home in order to understand and document what the reintegration experience has been like. We were there when they got married. We were there when they had children. We were there when they got divorced and battled for child custody. They revealed their innermost thoughts, feelings, and dreams and allowed us to bear witness. Now, we've witnessed many major life changes in their first years home, and time again, even in their most vulnerable and difficult moments, the commonality is that they continue to actively problem solve. I believe these women managed to move forward in part because military people are people of action, and they're accustomed to being mission-driven. Now, this process of storytelling has been revealing and often even therapeutic for the women veterans and their families who frequently engage us in conversations that they've not always been yet able to have with each other. They seem to find a freedom in speaking through us. But if this gap in understanding is happening within the military family, that gap can only be even more substantial between military and civilian culture. We civilians, we don't have the same lexicon. We don't speak in acronyms. We know little of basic training and really nothing about what it feels like to put our Kevlar on in the dark and huddle in a sandbag bunker while mortar rounds land nearby. You will never look at the world the same way again after a combat zone deployment because what you have witnessed changes you forever. But we, the civilian observers, are better not to assume that these changes are positive or negative because the reality of life is that they are most likely both. I'd like to introduce you to one of the incredible women of the Journey to Normal project. Now, what you're going to see here is a common struggle, and Jill candidly works through the process of discovery in front of the camera. She's a 13-year veteran of the National Guard, and this was her first combat deployment. Here she's been home for 10 months, and she's attempting to reconcile her deployment experience with her civilian life. In the process, she's working to accept the fact that she now sees the world differently and that something she valued, something essential, is now missing.
So I had to relearn my job. I had to relearn, my son. I had to relearn myself. And then, this whole wife thing, that was kind of different for me too because I didn't want to take on all the old crap I was doing, I say crap, but, and that sounds bad, but, I didn't want to be responsible for 90% of the child care. I wanted it to be more even, and especially since John had, basically been doing it for a year, and there were days I couldn't get up after the deployment. The only thing that got me up was Trevi, and, it just sucked. It did. It was hard. And now that it's behind me, it doesn't seem as difficult, I guess, but because I think the worst of it's behind me. But it was a lot to relearn and all at once because everybody expects you to come home and be like, oh, I'm so happy, and it's hard to explain that you're not because you don't even know who the hell you are anymore. And you're learning all this new stuff and being this totally different person, and it's just not easy. It's not easy. Afghanistan, yeah, you had to worry about some weird stuff that you don't have to worry about over in the United States, but at the end of the day, You didn't have to worry about providing a roof over your family's head. You had to worry about cooking supper, about, does your boss like you? Quite frankly, the Army doesn't care. That if you do your job, that's all they ask, but you'd have to network and, do all these other things. And I don't know, it just, in some ways, it's a lot easier over there. So like I said, I can kind of see why people go mad. Not that I want to, but the point of that was I still have a real hard time with civilian life because I spend all my time at home, and that's not normal either. But I don't like to do any of this other stuff, and sometimes even doing the other stuff bothers me because, I think I talked a little bit today, you're just another nobody, like you get treated the same, you get bumped into the same, you get dirty looks, you get, people, whatever, excuse me, or, why are you taking so long, or, whatever, and they don't understand your history, nor should they. They have no reason to, but it's really hard to go from, being somebody who was doing something very critical, very important, at least I feel, to now I'm just another, attorney trying to make a buck, or, another cat at the arts festival trying to buy some art. It's very difficult for me to adjust to that. And it's not like you want some band playing every time you leave the house, because you don't want that either. But I guess I didn't realize it was going to be so hard to go back to being a normal, average person. And I think that's something that is a little bit unique to Guard and Reserve because, again, you're not at a base where people can see you wearing your uniform every day. I mean, when I leave for drill, it's dark out because I drive so far. And so most people in my neighborhood never see me wear the uniform. People at my work don't see me wear the uniform. And so, like I said, it's not like I'm getting any recognition any longer for what I've done. I mean, when people find out about it, they say, thank you, but I'm not going to be the type to, oh, well, by the way, did you know I was in Afghanistan? It doesn't work like that. And so I just really struggled with that, being a normal, non-momentous person again. Just a mom and a wife, and oh yeah, you're a weekend warrior or whatever, you want to call yourself. But I don't know, it's just, I can't really put it into words why it's hard because, like I said, I don't want a band playing every time I leave the house or people saluting me or, whatever. But at the same time, I guess I didn't realize that normal would kind of feel so empty sometimes.
So I ask you to just take a moment and think, what is she struggling to say here? What is it that Jill is missing? She doesn't realize it in this interview. In fact, it's going to be another 9 months before she can fully articulate what she's undergoing. But it's a struggle here that's almost universal to the experience of returning veterans, male and female. Anybody want to take a guess?
She wants people to understand what she went through, but people can't understand.
We can't understand.
She doesn't want a band playing.
Right.
She just wants people to understand it, but it just doesn't get through.
So she has a lack of understanding. What else is going on with her? What very specifically is she missing? Yes, sir?
Mission?
It's a loss of mission. And when you've served in the military, especially on a combat deployment, your job, your purpose, your mission is clearly defined. It has to be for the whole effort to work. Drop the bomb, move the supplies, save the life. And your job is to fulfill that mission in support of your fellow veterans. You're so focused on that mission that you somehow become it. Your identity fuses with that mission, and you pour your heart and soul into it, and you rise to the challenge at every moment of every day. And when you step on that transport to come home, to rejoin your home life already in progress, that sense of mission-driven purpose, which has sustained you in the combat zone, is left behind. It vanishes. And to be clear, she doesn't want special treatment because of what she's done. quite the opposite. What she wants to feel again is that sense of mission-driven purpose once more. She wants us to understand. She wants to feel useful in her civilian life and that what she's doing has meaning and impact. And through the course of filming with her over 2 years, we saw her change jobs and move her families 3 times in search of that mission-driven purpose. Another one of our female soldiers deployed to Iraq with the 344th Combat Support Hospital. Now, they were deployed to the prison at Abu Ghraib shortly after the scandal. Their mission was to care for the Iraqi detainees. Now, for a year, they lived in cells in a section of the prison and cared for the inmates. She returns home and tumbles into an overwhelming depression. She goes through the motions of the activities she once loved, appearing to function within her expected routine in the hopes that her depression is going to go unnoticed. She shops. But when the decision about what to buy is so overwhelming for her that she can't choose between 2 items, she buys them both, only to return home and then leave the bags untouched by the front door. Now, the natural assumption is that her depression stems from the difficult or tragic things that she witnessed overseas, right? I mean, she was living in the prison at Abu Ghraib. Wrong. In fact, it's the exact opposite. It is a loss of mission. While deployed, everything she did felt so full of purpose. She felt so much meaning in her service that her return to her apparently less significant normal civilian life triggers a depression. Now, this is Yvonne. Yvonne is a world-class trauma surgeon who's been in the Army Reserves for over 18 years. In this 2011 interview, she's been home for 7 months from her first combat deployment. She talks about the disorientation that often happens when veterans come home, and her concerns that her honesty is maybe perhaps not always welcomed.
And we landed in Kuwait. The air quality there was better. We didn't have the oil, the pervasive and asphyxiating oil fumes. But you did have the sand, and still the sense that you were still there, but safe. At least you were not getting shot at. And then coming back to Fort Benning, and then back home, it was very disorienting. It was so disorienting. You know what was very hard? Going to a grocery store. I avoided going to a grocery store for weeks, and I'm somebody who I love buying groceries like vegetables and things. I love buying produce for some strange reason, and I just couldn't take it. The colors, the crowds, the pettiness of finding a space and people fighting over a parking space, or just like I think a big part of coming back home is trying to make sense of the way we live. That's a big part of it. It's very difficult. You come from a place where you didn't have much of things that here you have 30 of. You know, you go to some of the department stores and there's a wall of crackers, there's a wall of toothpaste, there's a wall. Do we really need that? Absolutely not. It's just noise in our lives that gets in the way of our lives. It's disorienting coming back. It's hard. And you don't want to. You need to control it because you don't want people to think you're crazy. You don't want your partner, your husband, your wife, your children to think that there's something wrong with you. You don't want to get a label. You don't want to. But I'm particularly, I think, in a difficult spot because I'm not part of a unit. So I don't have people around me that I can relate to in that sense openly. And so I would use Facebook, and that's limited because you can't really write much there, but to try to talk to some people that were still in Iraq and to some people that I knew had gotten back, and that's kind of how I got by the first couple months. Work was hard. People look at you like, are you okay? Yeah, they don't really want to know, but you know, they ask you, oh, so how was it, with a big smile on their face. And when you start to tell them just briefly, like, well, it was a lot busier than I thought, it was rough from a psychological perspective, that's like a conversation ender right there. Like, people don't want to hear what happened. They don't want to know how you feel. They don't want to reach out and listen and be a part of it at all. After a while, I just said, oh, it was fine. Yeah, it was fine. Because nobody, like, I had more sympathy from people saying that than if I actually spoke to them. I brought pictures back, but I deleted any picture that was crude or that I felt that would, in years to come, affect me in a way that I did not want to be affected, things I didn't want to remember. I'm good at blocking things out. And so I did that with many of the pictures, and very few people have actually asked me to see pictures, and if they want to see a picture, they just want to see the picture of the sandstorm that happened while I was there, or of the mud, or of the sand, or, oh, do you have any cool pictures of the spiders? Or, I mean, it's just so absurd, the lack of, and I don't want to say humanity, because these are good people, but just the lack of understanding of involvement. It's a TV war, so they don't feel it. It's like a video game. It's not palpable. It's not. They don't feel it here. I didn't talk to Kate about any of this, and there's still many things that I can't talk to her about, because I feel it's unfair for her to have to deal with this, and she just can't, as loving and as wonderful as she is, she just can't understand it. You have to live it. You have to see it to understand it. Plus, I'm not very good relaying things. But that was the hardest. That's the hardest, trying to fit in again, trying to pick up and just pretend nothing's happened, because you have been changed forever. I think in a good way. I feel very privileged to have experienced this. I feel honored to serve. Oh, it's one of the biggest things in my life. And I would do it 1,000,000 times over. I really would. And I hope that I'm able to go wherever it is that I'm needed and help. I don't like wars. I'm not sure I could ever hurt anyone, but I can mend them. I can patch them up.
We're often asked, what is the most universal thing we've learned while putting the project together? And I think it is this. It's a Chinese proverb that we use at the beginning of the film. He who returns from a journey is not the same as he who left. Now, Yvonne tells us that she feels changed, but she feels that it's in a good way. It's her greatest honor to serve, and she would, quote, do it 1,000,000 times over. Yet the experiences she has had leave her disconnected socially and professionally from a society that sometimes she feels largely can't be bothered to care. And one of the biggest issues that veterans face when redeploying home is a sense of isolation from their families, from their friends and coworkers, and from society at large. They've undergone a profound change, and fitting back into their previous life can be challenging. For some, I think there's something akin to a mourning period, which is hard for civilians to understand. Coming home to people you love often means leaving things behind that sustained you and were vitally important. And you have to grieve those losses, but often without even realizing that you're grieving, or with an understanding of what you're grieving. You lose the close personal relationships, those strong bonds established with battle buddies and friends, that brotherhood. You grieve the loss of your pre-deployment self. And most of all, you miss that sense of mission-driven purpose that often defines deployment. It is so hard to put all of these thoughts and feelings and reactions into words, especially in a culture where we're accustomed to asking, "How are you?" as a passing salutation, and not a genuine question to which we seek an honest answer. Deployment and reintegration demand personal reflection. You cannot put all of your experiences into perspective unless you reflect. Yet our society doesn't often want to reflect. We distract ourselves with entertainment and technology. It's why when asked, "How do you feel?" one of the women in the project said she feels like they were taking her skin off, like they were peeling a grape. How do you share a year's worth of the best and worst times in a few sentences? It's sometimes easier to remain isolated than it is to connect to a disconnected society. Now, we've learned that the complexities of deployment and reintegration are profound, and there is not a one-size-fits-all solution. If left unresolved, though, I believe it's possible that this grief can lead to risky behaviors, strained and broken relationships, depression, physical illness, all of which keep the veteran, and more importantly, our perception of them, in a cycle of sickness. Now, many combat veterans will tell you that navigating and surviving the war is sometimes easier than navigating and surviving the peace. Now, Judy has been in the Army Reserves for over 30 years, and she works as an operating room technician. She's deployed to both Iraq and Afghanistan with her other family, which is how she refers to her military brothers and sisters, most of whom she served alongside her entire military career. Here she answers the question, how can you leave your family behind to go to war? She answers from her perspective and from the perspective of her family.
How do you go away and leave your family for a whole year? I couldn't do that. I just couldn't do that. Oh, I just couldn't do it. But, you know, that's the military lifestyle. So you either get used to certain things as the years have progressed, like they get you used to certain things. So just going away for the 2 weeks was a big adjustment. You know, basic training was a big adjustment because that was, you know, from 4 months to a year for some people being away then just for training. So I guess it just, you know, over the years you just get used to it. Family gets used to it.
Do you say that to women when they say it to you? What's the
And sometimes it's a good thing. It allows them to miss you. It allows them to miss you and not take you for granted. You know, when you give somebody the opportunity to have to do something on their own, kind of like with us being over there, they do it. They do what they have to do to survive. They'll cook because they want to eat. They'll clean or they want to live in filth. You know, they'll go to work, go to school, come home, talk on the phone, hang out more with friends. So they make do. You know, the longer you've been in it, the more they get used to, you know, not having you there for that time period. But I mean, the first year was hard for, I want to say, it had to have been hard for them. I never really felt that, not the loneliness, like I missed them, but I had the distraction of being with the other families. So I don't think it was as bad for me as it probably was for them. And them being here and not knowing what's going on there, listening to the news and hearing the worst case scenarios as opposed to the good that could have been going on out there. I guess it was harder for them. But yeah, I think that's the biggest question people ask is, you know, how was it being away from your family for a whole year? And how do you do that? You know, and, you know, my family, they were good with it.
Now, Judy acknowledges that it's hard on her family when she's away for training or deployed for a long period of time. But her family is given the chance to rise to the occasion. And despite the fact that it isn't easy, they rise to the occasion. In Afghanistan, Colonel Stokes' job as a behavioral health interventionist was to keep people in the fight. Colonel approached service members from a place of acknowledging their inherent strength and resiliency, and he allowed them the opportunity to utilize that same strength and resiliency to move forward. He allowed people to rise to the occasion rather than treating them like they were broken people who needed to be fixed. which is unfortunately sometimes how society views our veterans. We see them as broken. Now, we encourage service members to remember that having a rough patch doesn't negate their strength. Rough patches are a normal part of everyone's lives, and their careers are perhaps more prone to rough patches than most, yet their strength is greater. But it is because of the strength which service members and veterans readily possess that we must take a proactive approach to outreach. And when our veterans speak, we must listen between the words. It is my experience that by the time a veteran throws up the flag of surrender, they are 10 steps down the road, farther down the road than the average civilian who cries out for help. By the time a request for help is made, the veteran is in more serious need of help and support than the average civilian making that same request. When they seek help, we must take them seriously. In that moment they reach out, they do not want our pity, they need our action. So what's next? How does this apply to us? The point of our work with Journey to Normal is to hopefully shake up the preconceived notions we have about veterans and to begin broadening our understanding and appreciation for their experience. As that gap in understanding narrows, the hope is that the disconnection from civilian society that many veterans feel will also lessen. In 2015, a study showed that the suicide rate for veterans of the current era is 16% higher for those who have never deployed. And VA determined that roughly 65% of all veteran suicides in 2014 were for individuals 50 years or older, many of whom spent little or no time fighting in the most recent wars. This shows us that deployment is not the only factor affecting veterans' well-being. Getting veterans connected to their communities and keeping them connected might help to lower these statistics. The more connected we are, the harder it is for us to fall through the cracks. Now, I believe one of the best ways we can show support for our veteran communities is take what we already do, whatever we do well in our lives, and utilize our gifts in support of this deserving population. When we speak about the project, we challenge our audience to make this project your own, to creatively consider how you might get involved. You might volunteer your professional expertise to help a veteran client with a business matter, or do their taxes for free. You might inspire your teenage child to babysit for a family that has someone deployed, or to watch their children when the veteran comes home so that couple can have some time to reconnect. Our support could be as simple as thinking beyond the phrase, "thank you for your service." When we say thank you, what do we really mean? What are we thanking them for? What else might we say? Continuing the conversation might also include changing our approach. Rather than starting with thank you for your service, maybe we start by finding the things we have in common with those who have served and use those points of commonality as the entry point to begin to understand our differences. The women of Journey to Normal are daughters, sisters, wives, mothers. We either fill those roles ourselves or we have those roles and those people in our lives. We can connect to them as human beings first and service members second. Now, the Journey to Normal project has big goals. We are giving voice to the female veteran experience, but as our women will tell you, this is not just a female story. They are the entry point. They are the catalysts who have already broadened the conversation to include military men, their children, and the community at large. So we are sharing the stories of JTN in various formats. The feature-length documentary film is finally completed and is ready to be screened. The full interviews with each of the women you saw today, and along with almost 90 more that I conducted in Afghanistan, will be accessible in their entirety on our website in a searchable database. This collection will be made available to the public, and it is intended for use as a research tool by academicians, policymakers, healthcare providers, and the general public. A substantial part of our mission is education. JTN is in the third year of offerings of Walking It In, which is a 15-hour contact continuing ed training designed to develop cultural competency in civilians and empower their interactions within the military community. Andrew and I can share more about that program if anyone here is interested. We are also always seeking strategic partnerships. JTN, as an example, partnered with Disabled American Veterans on their 2014 Congressional Special Report and a Capitol Hill screening of the JTN film short. This, though, I think, I'm backing up. Informing public institutions and catalyzing change is a very important part of our mission. If change does not come from an informed place, it will not work. The change can be in the minds and perceptions of community members, or in the actions of service providers, or change in actual policy and care models. Each is an important piece of the puzzle if we are to fundamentally reframe the national conversation. We are so grateful for opportunities like today where we can speak with the community about our work and our findings, and in these moments of learning from each other really helps to move our mission forward. I'm also here today to ask for your help. In order to continue making the mission of Journey to Normal successful, we need your support. We need your help to continue the conversation in our communities. We need places to screen this film. We need opportunities to empower public leaders through trainings like Walking It In. If you'd like to know more, please contact us. Our contact information is in all of your materials today, and I'll share it here in a moment. All of this was born out of a single story about a peanut butter and jelly sandwich as told on the Oprah Show. I stand here profoundly grateful that a single veteran story changed my entire life, but I am most excited now to see what you will do. I thank you for inviting me to be here with you today. I thank you for joining this conversation, and I am willing now to take any questions that you might have, and I have a few for you as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Julia. If you have questions, we have people with microphones. Megan Critchfield to my right from our tax services group, and Katie Smith from our business valuation services group. We ask that you use a microphone so everybody can hear your question.
Does anybody have a question they want to ask? I'm going to throw one out to you so that we can sort of get the conversation going since we still have a few minutes before lunch. And that is, we touched a little bit on thank you for your service. I have a question for you. When you say thank you for your service, what do you think you really mean? If you could articulate that phrase in other words, what are we really saying when we say thank you for your service? Yes? Thank you for protecting our freedoms. What else? What are we really saying in that moment? Yes?
Thank you for your sacrifices.
Thank you for your sacrifices. Yes?
A recognition of their bravery.
Recognition of their bravery, and you're saying because you don't feel that you personally have that same thing in your life, so you're grateful for it in someone else. What else? What are we really saying? I've thought about this a lot because I didn't realize before we started this work that can kind of be believe it or not, a hot button issue when you're talking with veterans. One of the questions that I asked everybody that we interviewed for the project is, what do you most want the American public to know that you think we miss or don't understand? And one of the things that came up time and time and time again, it's actually where we start the film, is this idea of they're not quite sure what to do when we thank them for their service, because they're not quite sure that we necessarily understand what we're thanking them for. And sometimes service comes with sort of a wealth of emotion behind it. And some days they're feeling positive about it, and some days it might be a little more challenging. So it becomes this awkward dance. I'm wondering if what we're really saying, and it's what you're all adding to the conversation, is, are we really saying, I'm grateful for your commitment? And I often wonder if maybe that's a place that we want to start the conversation to get beyond just thank you for your service that has become sort of the standard language, to really think what else might we say that might be beyond that. I also want to talk about how do we expand the conversation to start connecting with veterans? What are some of the ways into that conversation? What might that look like? And I'm going to flip it on its ear now, because the minute I say veterans and connecting, I know even I myself go like, wow, I don't do that thing, I don't know that thing, I'm not quite sure how to navigate that moment. But when you came here today and you put your name tag on and you walked into a room, and you might have known some people in the room, but a lot of people you didn't know, what were the first things that you did? What did you do? Shook hands. Introduced yourself, right? Might have looked at a name tag and noticed who's with what firm and who do you know in common, and all of these points of commonality, right? So we know how to do that in our civilian lives, but yet somehow the minute we attach the word veteran to it, we kind of do this, right? We step back from it because we're not quite sure how to navigate that moment. So what are some of the ways that we might get to discussing service through another door? What are some of those other ways we might connect? We had a conversation earlier about children. Maybe we talk about our children. Maybe we talk about our family life. Maybe we talk about where we grew up. And maybe the entry point to service then starts with things like, well, what branch of service were you in? So let's ask the who, what, when, where questions. When did you serve? What was that like? What was your military job? So that we're finding these easier ways to connect and build relationship. Does that make sense to anybody? Does anybody have any stories of working with or sharing stories with veterans, ways that they've connected that they might want to share with the group? And if you have questions too, just raise your hand. We'll move the microphone around. Anybody have any points of connection? Yes, sir.
I have a question.
Sure.
How do you approach those that are soliciting funds that are homeless, veterans?
That's a tough one. And the question is, how do you navigate that moment where homeless veterans are asking for funds? And that's a challenge, and I'm not sure, again, I'll be the first to tell you that I will never have the perfect answers, but I'm really good at generating the conversation. I can tell you personally that it's a difficult moment whenever anybody approaches you in that kind of a setting. I'm always more apt to provide the food than I am to provide the money, and I'm more apt in that moment to want to make a connection. Do we know where the veteran service organizations are in our community? Maybe that's something that we can learn, and in that moment, make an effort then to connect that person with a service organization that might be able to get them off the streets or might be able to provide them the tools to get to that next step. Again, rather than necessarily reacting to the moment, how can we look at changing our approach to prevent that moment from happening in the future? You know, we kind of live in a reactive society where we tend to only address problems once they are problems. But by connecting a veteran perhaps to a service organization that might give them the tools to move forward, then we're empowering them to get back on their feet. You know, we also deal a lot of times with behavioral health things that come up in those moments. And I'm not a trained behavioral health professional, but I know a lot of them. And I know how to connect people to them. So that might be another simple way that, you know, learn what is the VA Crisis Center hotline number. Maybe we tuck that in our wallets or in our cell phones. Maybe we have those tools on hand. All of these very simple, basic things that we can do that just might make a difference.
A lot of organizations that try to help veterans. The question I have is for you is there a central vetting organization or something that can guide people? So if someone meets a veteran that's in need, perhaps he needs help with some finances, perhaps he needs a job, maybe there's a health care or a distress emotional issue, is there a place that people can look that helps manage the flow so that they have some help in getting to that help to that person?
We're actually really lucky in Pennsylvania. In Pittsburgh, we have the PA Serves Network. And Journey to Normal has been involved with them. We actually train the trainer. The people who are answering those hotlines have gone through our Walking It In training to sort of empower their interactions and inform their interactions differently. But the PA Serves Network is a wonderful point of connection. They basically walk individuals through the system. And if a veteran calls or someone calls on behalf of a veteran, they're connected to a person who is then their case manager, who will then take them through the entire process. So if today it's a financial need, then we're going to make this connection and we're going to follow up to make sure that that happens. And if tomorrow it's a behavioral health need, we're going to make this connection here and follow up, so that they try to create that safety net that keeps people connected, but is also good at problem solving what all the potential issues might be. Because, you know, in everyday life, one problem can sometimes then start that domino effect of other things. You lose the job, then there's the question of the health care, then I can't pay my bills, and all of these things then sometimes have a domino effect where these people are trained to make all of those connections to do a network of support, starting with a single interaction.
Thank you.
Yes, sir. PA serves, and we can get you some more information about that, and we can provide that for the conference as well. But Mercy Behavioral Health is the lead partner in running that. The Heinz Foundation has supported it. There's an institution at Syracuse. I always screw up the name of the institution, but they helped to create that network and build that network here in Pittsburgh. So very, very good people doing a lot of very important things. Other questions for me? What are some things that you might be inspired to do this weekend on Veterans Day that maybe might be different than you did last year? Simple, basic things. What might you do that might be kind of interesting? How many of you have family members who have served? What about picking up the phone and making a call and asking them to tell you what they most loved about serving in the military? Maybe we can start sharing the stories among our family members and understanding that moment differently. How many of you have coworkers who have served? Do any of you know if you have coworkers who have served? Might that be a question that we want to now ask within our offices? Do you know who your neighbors are who have served? Maybe we can start by identifying who in our community has made this incredible commitment on our behalf and do really simple, basic things. Does anyone else have any other questions for me? I'm going to hang around at lunchtime too. Yes, ma'am. Oh, story. I love stories. We're going to get you a microphone so that we can really hear.
So this just recently happened to me. We have new neighbors, and they are military.
Mm-hmm.
The husband is in the Army, and the wife is a military spouse.
Mm-hmm.
And I had dinner with her, and she said, you know, we've lived all over the United States. We've lived in Canada. We've lived in foreign countries. This is the first time ever that we have lived in a neighborhood that's not like a military base. And
Big
she
change.
said it's very different for them. They don't even know how to react. And he's not in combat, although he has been in the Virgin Islands helping after the hurricanes. But it was eye-opening to me that just our neighborhood, where we all take that interaction for granted and we know how to act with each other and invite each other to dinners and functions, and that's very unusual for them. They don't relate easily to that because they've had the military base experience and they've always been at Fort Bragg or Fort wherever. And I just thought that was very interesting.
What I love about your story is proving this point about the fact that we have a lot we can learn from them, but yet we also have so much that we can share with them, that we can help teach and make that moment more comfortable for people. Because we do civilian really well, right? We know how to bake the casserole and knock on the door and invite people to the block party. And that's what we do, especially in a place like Western Pennsylvania, where our neighbors are really an important part of our daily lives. So that's brilliant. And what an amazing thing that you made that connection. And now you can help a family navigate that moment. Like that's brilliant. That's exactly what we want to hear more of. Does anybody else have any other questions? Andrew and I are going to be around for lunch. I am so grateful that you took the time to be here today and join our conversation. And I thank you so much for all of the things that I know are coming down the pipe that you're going to do to move the ball forward. Thank you so, so much.
Again, Julie, on behalf of the partners and the professionals of West Virginia Ford, we appreciate you coming. And we hope that this presentation has opened your eyes as much as it did mine, and that you can do some more good for veterans.